So here's my plan. I'm going to try to get a Crown Vic swap done on this truck in a weekend. What that means is get the Crown Vic suspension put underneath the truck and see if I can't get the brakes hooked up and get the steering hooked up and get this thing to where it's actually rolling again. Probably not going to get the front sheet metal back on or anything like that, but at least get the truck to where I can move it in and out of the shop on its own wheels again, and to where I can steer it with the steering wheel. So it's Friday night. My plan is to pull the hood off of this thing, try to pull the front sheet metal off in one big piece, and see if I can't get the drivetrain out of it tonight. And then tomorrow I can come through and start cutting all the front suspension out, just cut those rivets out of the frame, that sort of stuff. Get all the cross I-beam out of here and get the frame ready to go so that we can roll the Crown Vic front end underneath this thing and get it mocked up, get those alignment holes drilled, and start getting the Back Yard Customz kit actually installed, welded in place, and ready to go there. And then probably Sunday, if things go well tomorrow, try to get brake lines hooked up, steering stuff hooked up. And so I've done some research online, seen what other guys have used to make this go as smooth as possible. I'll walk through those parts real quick and show you guys what I'm planning to use. Hopefully this stuff all works out. I know there's some differences in these trucks from year to year and options to options, depending on if you have automatic trans or standard trans or power steering, or you didn't have power steering, that sort of stuff. So anyway, I got some parts. Maybe I have to return some things, maybe I don't, and then I'll get on with tearing this thing apart. So here's a quick little time lapse of us taking the GoPro to the junkyard. We found a Crown Vic front end underneath the front of a Crown Vic, obviously. It was a police interceptor, had like 60 or 70,000 miles on it, and I'm not sure if it'd been hit in the back end or what happened to it, but anyway, this looks like total time on the GoPro. I had about 23 or 25 minutes for two guys to pull the front end out of this thing. So it actually came out, I think, with about 10 bolts and a little bit of work, and we were able to put this thing on a cart and wheel it up out of the junkyard. Okay, so we got the front sheet metal off, the engine came out. The front sheet metal actually came off pretty easily. I was kind of surprised at how few bolts actually hold the whole assembly on. There was, once the bumper comes off, the two main core support bolts here come out, and then there's the 3 on each side on the firewall. There was 1 on the inside of the door on each side, and then these kind of tire pieces back on the firewall here. And then the whole front assembly just lifts right off. You saw 2 guys can lift it off without much trouble at all. So now I've got a little bit of cleanup to do. I gotta finish taking this thing apart. So the power steering assembly on this truck has to come out. If your truck didn't have power steering, then that should just be an easier thing for you, less to deal with. So then I'm gonna go ahead and start cutting the front cross member out here. I'll tack a piece of scrap metal or something across the 2 front frame horns here, just to make sure the frame stays nice and square. And I guess the suspension, I think I'm gonna have to just disassemble it. I don't see a real easy way to drop the suspension out all as one unit and just roll it out of the way, although that'd be super nice because I don't plan to use any of it and I just want it out of my way for now. So I guess cue the fast forward action and I'll just kind of take out the stuff that I don't need here, and then I'll probably mark a center line and come back and start making some cuts on this thing. So at this point, it looks like the front suspension's gone now, and it'll go ahead and take out these rivets in this cross member. So these spring pockets have got to come off here. It looks like these are held on by 1, 2, 3 rivets. And then if we look around underneath here, move this light. Looks like on the bottom side there's a bolt or 2 that goes through here. I'm not sure whether I use bolts in some places and rivets in others. And then there's this cross bracket that comes over. Again, a rivet on the bottom of it here, and 2 rivets that hold it on to the main cross member support there. So I think what I'll probably do is just take the plasma cutter and just plasma this piece in half, since I'm not planning to use it, and go ahead and take these bolts and rivets out of here. Just take a cutoff wheel and cut them in half and use the air hammer like I normally do. Get all this extra stuff. So still working on getting these rivets out of here. A couple of these, like the ones on the bottom of the frame and the side here, came right out, but they weren't always sandwiched between 2 pieces of metal. These 2 rivets here are actually sandwiched between 3 pieces of metal. So you got the frame, you have the spring pocket, and then you have this, like, what do they call it? The cross I-beam mount bar here. And so this is the 3rd piece on the outside. So I just cut the rivet off, try to knock it back. But if you try to push the rivet back through this piece and this center spring pocket here, the rivet actually just flares out in the middle and it doesn't actually go into the frame. So what I did is just took there's 2 bolts on the bottom of this piece. I took the 2 bolts out of there and was able to just pry this off with a pry bar. And so now I'm going to have to go through and kind of finish cutting these rivets down flush again so that I can actually drive them back into the frame and knock them. Okay, so now for the big part. It's time to start trying to take the center section out of here. So my plan is going to be to take the plasma cutter and just run along the top where it's kind of welded in place here, and run down the sides on each side. So if I can't just cut the main section of this center section out. It's welded like against the frame wall over here in a couple places, like inside there, so I have to go, I guess, take the plasma or something to kind of work my way into there. But my plan was to get the big section taken out first, and then hopefully have some more room to work and come in and do that detail cleanup on the inside of the frame rails there, and kind of make this thing look how I want it to. So I got most of the cross member cut out now, and it's the big piece laying on the ground there. But the side pieces here, I've still got to go through and figure out how to cut out what's inside of the frame here, because we need that real estate to put that Back Yard Customz box kit into. So looks like there's just some welds here across the top where they've welded the cross member to the frame here in a few places. So I think I can go through with the plasma and maybe cut those out and try to knock that out of the way. And then same thing on the inside. Looks like there's a couple of welds, a couple of beads from the factory just along the inside here, and maybe one on the bottom. So I'll take the plasma and kind of keep working on this and dig this stuff out of here. Looks like besides that, I've got the same work to do on each side. The driver's side's got this extra boxing plate in it. And it looks like it's got just a few welds in it here. I'll go through the plasma cutter and just cut this section out of here and get it out of the way so that we can put that Back Yard Customz kit in there. The frame's pretty greasy still, so I'm going to probably just take a putty knife or something to kind of clean this grease off of here so as I cut it, it doesn't make a big old smoky, fiery mess. So at this point, I got everything pretty well cleaned up where I want it. The frame rails have been cleaned out. I got the final kind of grinding done, finished grinding all the extra parts and stuff that I'm not going to use right out of the way. Kind of started looking at how this Back Yard Custom kits is going to go in here. So what I'm going to do now is drag that front end over here off the Crown Vic, just put it on the jack and try to put it up underneath the bottom of the frame here, see how the things are going to line up, and get ready to start drilling some holes. So this looks like it's going to work out really, really well. So the Back Yard Customz guys actually recommend using these forward of the two lower holes in the frame here, kind of where the bump stops were. And maybe we'll show this side a little bit easier with some better light in it. So there's two holes. They use the forward one. And you can see the pin is lined up on this side, but on the driver's side right now, just the way I have it set up, this pin is actually a little bit too wide for this hole. So I guess what I'll do is kind of split the difference here and slightly open up and widen, enlarge these holes here out towards the outside of the frame and make sure I can get these pins to fit in here like they're supposed to. So I'll just kind of drop this thing down, maybe take a quick measurement and start kind of hogging these holes out a little bit here to widen them up a tad, and then get this front end where it sits nice and flush against the bottom of the original truck frame, and get it ready to start making some marks and putting these boxes in. Alright, so I got these holes hogged out with the die grinder, and all I did was take the existing hole there and kind of widened it back as square as I could to the outside of the frame rail there, and enlarged it slightly so that the pin sits nice and center with the original hole there. Same thing on both sides, and the front end seems like it lines up really well now, drops right in place. So now on to step two, you go ahead and put these boxes on top. Okay, so the way they recommend doing this is using this hole on top of the frame, which I guess I should have got a smaller diameter drill bit, but this hole lines up with the location that this lower pin comes to here. So you have a nice straight line, and you use this hole as a centering mark for your Back Yard Customz box plate. So there's a hole in the bottom of the plate here, this hole here, and what you do is center that hole up real nice and square with this hole in the top of the frame. The hole is directly in line with the pin that you just dropped through there. And we'll just line it up here, and if you look down through it, you can square that thing up really nicely. So then it looks like these holes with the original Crown Vic front end here will line up with the two pin holes, the two tube holes in the actual box plate here you get from Back Yard Customz. So what I'm going to do is on both sides now I'm going to center the hole that's in the box with the hole that's in the frame, because it's directly over the top of this pin now, and then mark the frame and then remove material on the top of the frame to slide this box down in there. So all I'm going to do is remove like a top kind of triangle of the frame. So I'm going to cut here and cut across and then cut out this way, and just take this whole horizontal section out of the it's the C-channel frame here. The top section of the C is just going to come out, and then that box should line up and with the bottom pin here, and we can go through and weld the whole thing in place. But the first thing to do, needs to be done is that you need to clean this piece up a little bit, and then all these seams on the box need to be welded. So I'm just going to take this over to the bench and lay it on the metal table I got and just kind of weld up all these seams here so it makes this one nice solid piece. So it looks like this plate's going to fit really well in here. It won't quite sit down all the way, but it looks like that's just because it's hung up on the back. I need to do a little more trimming. So you can see back here on this side where I cut the back side of the frame out, there's this top piece that kind of folds over, and you can see where it's just catching the frame like right through here, and then again back towards the back. It's touching the frame and it's not allowing this box to actually drop down inside of the frame here. So what I'm going to do is just kind of keep sneaking up on this with either a flat disc or a plasma cutter and kind of take some material out of here. You can probably see that light gap in there until the frame has enough material removed where this will actually just drop in inside of the frame here. So I'll keep working on that, but besides that, it looks like this thing's going to fit really nice and tight and gives you a nice wedge type fit in here, and should make a nice piece once it's all welded in. Alright, so front end's mocked back in place here. It's just being held up with the jack. I've gotten the frame cut on both sides to where these boxes fit in real nicely, and so with the pin located here in the bottom, it all looks like it's going to fit together like really well here. So what I'm going to do now is take these boxes out, just take them over to the bench and weld all the seams they have in them, and then come back and put them in, bolt it in place, and get this thing ready to like burn these boxes into the frame once and for all. So at this point, we're ready to start doing the test fit and get the final welding started. So what I did here is put a couple of larger holes in the frame. I just put the new Crown Vic cross member up underneath the frame here, and I took a pin on the bottom side and tried to mark the center of these holes. And then I made the holes slightly oversized, or like a 55 64ths or 52 64, something like that. And so they're maybe a little bit bigger. They're close to a 3/4 inch hole. What that does, so it gives me a little bit of leeway to take these factory Crown Vic bolts and drop them down through here, and have a little bit of, I guess, tolerance to where everything doesn't have to be completely perfectly lined up, where these new structural tubes can sit over the new holes in the frame that I made, and hopefully the bolt will go down through everything like it's supposed to here. So I've got the frame cleaned up for all the places I want to weld it. Went ahead and did the finish welding. Like I said, it's not finish welding, but it's the actual welding you're supposed to do in these boxes. So I just came and put a bead all the way around here and on the seams and everything, so that box is nice and solid. So I'm going to put it in and bolt everything together nice and tightly, and then put a couple of hot tacks on this thing so I can get the cross member out of the way and come back and do all the finish welding to weld these boxes into the frame once and for all. So everything's been burned in at this point, and boxes are welded in solid to the frame. I'm trying to get the frame kind of cleaned up here. I'm going to put some of that rust encapsulator on here just to keep the rust down to a minimum and make the thing look a little bit nicer. And then obviously these boxes are going to rust. They got to have some sort of coating on them. I put the rear, the control arm mounts on the frame as well. I just set these on top of the control arm bushings where they were sitting there. They're kind of natural free floating position, and centered everything up, and then welded those in place. That way when I dropped the whole front suspension out from underneath the truck, I could go through and just finish weld everything all at one time. No real magic or science to putting these things on. I did have to reclock the rear control arm bushings here just because the way the adjustment slot is in the bushing from the factory, it sits kind of at a 45-degree angle or so. And so I just did what everybody else does. I cut the top with a cutoff wheel and then rotated the bushing inside and then pinched it back together with a big giant C-clamp and welded it back together on top and made a nice weld there. So no big deal there, no big science or anything. I think a lot of guys have done the same project on YouTube and on forums and stuff, so I didn't want to spend a lot of time covering that. Anyway, everything lined up really nicely, and everything looks like it's going to sit nice and square, nice and centered in the frame here. So all the welds are burned in, all the things are ready to go here, so I'm just going to clean it up, put some paint on it, and try to get it put back together once and for all here. My goals may have been a little bit over ambitious for one weekend's worth of work. So just the amount of welding and the amount of cleanup this thing took and trying to get that crossmember cut out of there, things took quite a bit longer than I was expecting to. Nonetheless, the truck is on its new wheels, on the new suspension, has some finished details to go. Everything has to be hooked up now. I've got to hook up brake lines and hook up the steering shaft and finish mounting the sway bar and all that sort of stuff. So it looks like it's going to line up real good. So it looks like the Crown Vic stock steering shaft here with just a U-joint should align to the steering column of this truck. I was actually going to swap this truck to be an automatic, and which means I'm going to swap this steering column. So my guess is the lengths of shafts and U-joints I'm going to need are going to change slightly here. All in all, this is a pretty big project for a weekend. He's got a plan to spend quite a bit of time doing welding and cleaning up and all that sort of stuff. Definitely set the truck quite a bit lower to the ground, kind of leveled it out a little bit more, so it should sit down even more once I get the engine and stuff installed back in there as well. So we'll call this video done here, and then I'll come back next weekend and try to finish putting a new brake master cylinder on it, trying to hook up the brakes and brake lines, and kind of working through some of the little details here. And I got to put some holes in the frame to actually tie this sway bar mount into the frame here and make sure everything's sitting nice and square like it's supposed to be. But like I said, that'll be a project for next weekend.